Okay, so we're getting towards the last video, number 11 in this series. You think you've finished because you've said the last word on your recommendations. There's a lot to go yet. So here's some of the things that you should be thinking about. The first is try and find a nice way to round this off in the same way that we use phrases like, I now look forward to hearing from you at the end of your covering letter. You need to find something rather than just take your pen off the paper at the end of a long list of recommendations. What I would suggest is that you look forward. For example, I'm just making this up, I'm not suggesting you use it at all, but it will therefore be interesting to see whether the company will have the courage to look honestly at this critique of its strategic processes and whether it is prepared to invest sufficient time, energy, and money in correcting the problems that I've identified and implementing new approaches which are likely to give a better return on investment. Perhaps a future MICIE student might be an idea to be able to take this agenda forward. If you leave something like that, it's a nice, polite, gentle, reflective idea at the end of it. Don't just sort of take your point off take your pen off with the last recommendation. Okay, now we've got to move on. Now you've written your conclusions, you've written your recommendations, but there is this possibility of what the American forces call mission drift. It's where you start intending to go like that and you end up, through no fault of your own, through incredible discoveries that you've made en route, going here. Well, that means that at the beginning, your introduction says, I'm going to do this, but your conclusions and your recommendations said, I did that. You dare not let that happen. You have to make sure that the two are consistent. So read your conclusions, read your recommendations one more time, and go back to your introduction. Review your title, your aims and objectives, and what you said was likely to be the end point, the intention of the whole thing. Is that what was the result of your conclusions and was embodied in your recommendations? If it wasn't, you have a problem. There are two ways of solving the problem. Option number one, change the content to fit the title and the aims and objectives. Massive, gigantic. You've probably got 60 pages or more to tweak and mess around with and change. You can't do that. What you might need to do is to revisit your introduction, modify your title slightly, change your aims and objectives a little bit so that it fits the journey that you've been on and the destination that you arrived at. So you really need to make sure that that's the case. The problem is, of course, that this is right at the end. The recommendations come right at the end of the process. It's easy to cut them because you're in a rush to cut them back, but please, please, please remember that your recommendations are critical because they show us your master's worthiness. Are you good enough? Have you shown that you've added to the sum total of knowledge to the advantage of your employer? That's what we're looking to see. Okay, next point. Proofing, relecture. Recommendation number one, you run the entire thing through spell check, changed to whatever language you're working in. Your spell check on your machine almost certainly is in French if you're French and working at UHA. Change it to the language that you're writing in. Things are underlined in red. Suggestions are made as to what the improvement or correction could be. Use it. Secondly, there are tools like Grammarly, which I have told you about repeatedly, which, if you set it to English again, go even further than spell check and they offer you suggestions for improvement to expressions, grammar, spelling, and they even give you explanations as to why they think it's necessary. Use it. The one thing we don't want to find in a read-through once something has been submitted is a whole load of basic errors that spell check or Grammarly would have picked up. That just irritates the hell out of us. Please don't do it. Use these tools, which are entirely appropriate, and they do not involve plagiarism. All they're doing is helping you express what you want to express. They're not writing it for you. Thirdly, and this is going to seem awful, but I've recommended it to you in every context I've ever taught you. Read the document out loud, à haute voix. If you only read it on the screen, you will not see half of the mistakes that you can hear. When you start reading something aloud, you are looking for clues that help you structure the sentence, put in pauses and breaks, etc. And if you are falling over your words or it's going on forever without a break, you know there's something wrong. You won't see it if you read it on screen, but you will see it, you will hear it if you read it out loud. So please, 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 I know it sounds stupid, but you will hear your errors, mistakes, repetition from 3 lines above coming back to haunt you. They bounce off the walls. I find far more mistakes when I read things out loud than I ever do reading on screen. The same is true when I'm doing translations and other things. So please, please, please do that. It might be sensible as well to, if you're living at home, show this to your mum and dad. Ask them to, you know, just look at it. And if there's anything that they can't make sense of, it's just not clear to them, they can tell you it's not clear, and maybe you can think about how to improve that. That's not cheating either. That's just common sense. That's trying to make sure things are expressed the way you want to express them. So please, please, please make sure your work is proofed. Number 3, citation and attribution. You have to be so careful with how you deal with the sources that you have used. You know that if you are quoting, you should automatically give at least, if you're using the Harvard referencing system, the name and the date with the quotation, Jolly 2020. I know whether this person is good, is famous, is trustable, and I know how recent it is. If it's ancient from 1996 and it's talking about social networks, predating virtually all of them, I might think it's of no use at all. So that gives me enough information with your quotation, but I also need the full bibliographic reference appropriately and consistently in a bibliography at the end of your work. Okay? Some people might want to use MLA, where you use a footnote system. Of course, I've got no objection to that. But whatever system you use, I need to be able to identify where that quote came from, to be able to find the source that's attributed, the full bibliographic reference, so that I can go and check you out. I can go and make sure that this is right and that Kotler really did say that about international marketing. Okay? You really have to do that. Not just when you're using quotations, remember, it's when you're paraphrasing someone else. You still have to give the name and the date in the text. You still need to give the full bibliographic reference. Same goes when you're not necessarily paraphrasing, but there is something here, you're borrowing somebody's concept. Same goes. You have to be able to show those. You are going to have to put your work through a plagiarism checking tool. Currently, we use something called Compilatio, and you will be invited to place a digital copy of your work in Word or PDF file format on our reader, and it will check. And if it finds stuff from other PhDs or rapport de stage or from other sources that you have not attributed, it logs them. And in the end, it gives us a percentage of your rapport de stage, which appears elsewhere in other people's work, which you have not attributed. For me, if anything comes up like that, you should be taken to task and you should be penalized. At the moment, as I understand it, unless things are changing, if it's under 10%, we can probably live with it. It's maybe an innocent error, but it's above that, we may just not accept it at all. You've been warned about this forever and a day since you started. Please, right at the end, do not risk your master's certificate by finding that your rapport de stage is rejected. And then we have problems with the soutenance. Given that your rapport de stage appears to have a lot of unacknowledged support from other sources, how can we believe what is in the soutenance is really yours? Now, if you fail both of those elements, well, you fail your M2 and you don't get your master's. So, and that has happened in MICAI, by the way. So please be very careful indeed and make sure when you're reading something that you're copying and pasting, that you copy and paste the attribution, the source data, so that you can put it in a bibliography and we, your readers, can find it. I know of one of my colleagues, by the way, who when he's dealing with PhDs, he deliberately goes and reviews every single reference that there is in the bibliography. I've even seen him at a PhD Viva saying that wasn't on page 44, it was on page 46. Okay, you have been warned. We do look at this. So please be careful of the risk of plagiarism, which can come from intention to plagiarize. It can come from there being very little time left, not having time to check. So you have to record your sources as you go and as you use them. My recommendation, don't paraphrase, quote, because when you see quotation marks in your own work, that shows you I need a source underneath it. If you paraphrase, it's easy to forget, but even the paraphrase is likely to be picked up as being attributed to some particular person. So please be very, very careful with that at all, altogether. Appendices, annex, as you call them. Remember, an appendix for us is like the human appendix. What do I mean by that? I should be able to read your entire report and make sense of it from first word of the introduction to the last word of the recommendations without having to go to see anything in the appendix. An appendix is for extra information, for contextual information, for information in further depth that you do not necessarily need to understand this, but you might just be interested in. It is not a dumping ground for information that you couldn't be bothered to squeeze in or to hide the fact that you are massively overrunning your word and page limit. So be careful about your use of appendices. Graphs and figures, again, remember the sources, remember to label them properly. We need to know what the title of them are. The title of them is. We also need to be sure that we can read them properly. Sometimes we see diagrams with no axes. They're not labeled. We don't know what is being measured against what. There's a line and it's going up. What the hell does that mean? You know, because you've read the source, but if you haven't transcribed the figure, the diagram correctly, we can't understand it. So please be careful about that. Clearly, you've got to page up your document and do the pagination so that you can actually refer back. On page 21, this was considered, well, relating to what was on page 21, then this. So please do remember to do that. Do remember to have a structure within your chapters. It really helps to understand, am I looking at the main heading? Am I looking at the subheading? Am I looking at the subheading? A numbering system helps. 1.1.1 maybe. I wouldn't want to go too much further. I wouldn't want to do 1.1.1 Roman numeral 4b. That's just perhaps a little bit too over the top. But having something main heading, subheading, subheading does give a sense of structure. It also helps us when you're reading your work back, if at the end of major chapters, you summarize where you've got to and how that leads into what's going to come next. So make sure you don't just kind of finish and then we turn the page and think, what the hell's this? Why this? Why now? I don't know. So please think about a nice segue between those, a transition, if you want. Acknowledgements. Do you have to do acknowledgements? Do you have to praise your university tutors? No, you do not have to. If it's up to you, I would strongly recommend that you say something nice about your supervisor, because it is decent, it's honorable, it's respectful. From our side of the coin, it would be nice to think that you are also doing that because you're feeling positive about it. Maybe the company's feeling positive about a student that's come from Mikayi or wherever, and therefore might be inclined to come back and follow up the relationship and replace you at the end of your placement, your internship. So acknowledgements, you don't have to credit your tutor. By all means, if you want to say thanks to your family who have supported you throughout this long process, which has gone through school and through college, university, degree level, master's level, it's a long haul for your parents. I'm in the middle of it, so just look at the state of me. But it is nice if you can say something back to them and they can have a copy of it there and feel that they were somehow part of supporting that. So there's nothing wrong in saying that. But we are not going to take marks off if you don't give us fulsome praise as your teachers or tutors in the acknowledgements. It's nice to see it sometimes, but we don't take marks off, we don't have marks on, okay? Planning wise, please work back from the day that we need it. We need your work in hard copy normally and in the digital version on Compilatio a full 10 days before your soutenance date, and we will notify you of when that is. Normally it's between the beginning of the academic year, the rentrée in September, and about the 14th, 15th of October. Otherwise, we can't catch the cycle to enable you to graduate in the academic year to which you really belong. So whatever date it is, you've got to make sure it arrives at the university by a given date, work back 10 days from that, and include postage for another 4 or 5 days or whatever it happens to be in that to be safe. Cover your back. Send us a digital copy so that your first reader, your prof referent, and your second reader have a digital copy. So if they want to get started early, rather than drumming their fingers waiting for the post, then they can do. If ever there is a delay, you've taken this to the relayeur to be able to get it bound. There's been a problem, a delay, etc., and you're going to be cutting into time, because normally we penalize it if your work is not there as it should be on the date it should be. I would recommend that in that situation, you send us the full version electronically and say, I have done it, it is done, it is on its way to you, etc. So at least there's proof you've done it by the deadline and we can work on it. Heaven forbid that you're in a situation where you haven't quite finished by the deadline. At least write to us, apologize, explain why, and show us what you've got so we can see how close you are to it. Okay, at least you're doing your best to be able to reduce the impact of being late. But I have to say, the penalties for being late are written into the livret de stage. So please be very, very careful about that. That actually, for me, is about it. I hope this series of videos has helped you to be able to have something that you can work alongside as you go through the process from coming up with ideas through to doing the proofreading and the sending off of your rapport de stage document. I hope it's helped. Sorry, they've been a bit long. As I said, there's 10 or 11 of these, but I thought it would be helpful for you to encapsulate what we had tried to do in rather more detail on the Intro to Research course, so that you have a short, sharp version of that that can work with you throughout the process. Under my stagiaires tab on Toniversity, I also have things from Céline Finger or Finger, who won the best rapport de stage in Alsace competition, actually saying what made it good for her, what made it work for her, what she thought were the key points in getting it right. And I didn't edit her work, but that's up there. There is an introduction written by Charlotte Chauffin that gives you an idea of the clarity needed to set up an introduction. You don't have to follow it, and I don't want you to follow it. That's plagiarism, but it's there to help you envision the type of thing that you need to do in terms of clarity so that your tutor can be comfortable with it. You can also go back to my Intro to Research course notes and the links that I put up there, which will help you with things like populations and sampling and using survey software and things like that. So I hope this has been useful for you. I'll now sign off and get these up on YouTube and attached to my site. And I will also send them to MICAI Course Management. And I have suggested, I don't know whether it will be taken up, but I have suggested that perhaps it might be helpful if Course Management do something similar on particular aspects of the administration process of your stage and the rapport de stage. Okay, thanks. I've done my bit. All the very best of luck to you for this acid test of just how good you are after a year and a half of MICAI. I hope to look at your results and be really happy that you've made it, and COVID willing, to see you at your graduation ceremony. That would give me an immense amount of pleasure. Anyway, thank you very much and goodbye.